Welcome to It Takes a Village, Raising Resilient Kids in Today's World. My name is Dr. Ann Bergen. I think it's pretty universal truth that all parents want their kids to grow up to lead lives of happiness, to find meaning and purpose in their lives. And it's really interesting that the recent research that is out there is showing that we can now isolate the fundamental foundations of well-being, and they can actually be modeled and taught. And one of the ways that researchers have arrived at these conclusions is that they study people who actually thrive. They study people who have found a way to live lives of meaning and purpose, and then they do research into what contributed to it, how that came about. And especially those people who had some challenges in life, they weren't dealt a very positive deck of cards in life and had to overcome a lot of challenges, and yet they managed to thrive while other people in the same situation kind of fell apart. So this research is very, very fascinating. And my guest today, Kyra Altman, is a young woman who is thriving and to me is inspirational. I don't know her very well, but I've learned about her, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. So I welcome you today.
Thank you.
And now, I know that you're a college student now, and you're at George Washington. You're a sophomore?
Yes.
A sophomore,
yes.
Okay. So how about telling us, first of all, one of the things, the power of this show, if you can call it power, is that people's willingness to kind of share their stories. And it seems to be the best way we can connect with other people is by sharing, and if you're willing to do, when I talk about thriving and overcoming, you've had some challenges that you've had to overcome, and would you kind of maybe give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah. So let me work backwards a little bit. Right now, I am a sophomore at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. I'm home right now on spring break, so it's lucky I get to be here today. Thank you for having me on. I'm studying at school Human Services and Social Justice with a minor in public health because I want to work in the nonprofit sector, specifically public health issues in the nonprofit sector. And that has been my dream and my goal for years, since before I can remember. My first fundraiser was in 6th grade called the Every Paw Counts Dog Walk. It's been a journey. But it was
just something that you knew right from a young age, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it came from earlier years seeing problems that I was helpless to fix, and then wanting to take whatever power I did have and then address those problems. And so as a 6th grader, it was my first fundraiser, the Every Paw Counts Dog Walk. I actually had a dream about it. I knew of the organization, Canines for Disabled Kids, and I actually interned for them a few summers ago, full circle. And they provide scholarships to disabled children who can't afford service dogs. And so I had a dream one night of this whole walk and fair and event, and I woke up and I ran into my dad's room and I said, "Dad, I have this idea. I want to do it. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it." And that's kind of what happened, and that started it. And from that moment on, I kept having ideas, and I kept putting my ideas down on paper, and I really enjoying that process of watching it go from an idea to a reality and watching my ideas come to life. And so I grew a love and passion for that, which then brought me into the nonprofit world and the more professional side of things, where now I'm working toward a career in that.
That's unbelievable. And so now, but you're also involved in another project right now that you're working on. Tell us about that, what your current...
Well, let's start from the very beginning.
Yeah.
When I was 2 years old, my parents got divorced. So I was very young, and they both remarried. And through a lot of changes and moves and new situations, not to the fault of either of my parents, there were some traumatic things that had happened. Right. And so because of that, I had a lot of emotions that I didn't really know how to work through. And I had a lot of pain and a lot of uncertainty about the future. So I channeled that into helping others, and I channeled that into the events that I would plan. coming back to the project that I'm now working on, is right now I'm actually serving as the president of a nonprofit, a 501c3 charity. I co-founded it as a sophomore in high school. And our mission is to provide educators and students with mental health training and curriculum to improve well-being, promote mental health education, and improve early intervention in schools for mental illness. And so going back to that hard time when I was younger, a lot of those traumatic experiences gave me a lot of anxiety, gave me a lot of post-traumatic stress. In middle school, I had horrible nightmares all the time. I would have panic attacks in school. I had a really difficult time managing that. And then that turned into a depression, and then that turned into eventually really severe, horrible thoughts and feelings. And I just wasn't thriving. You know, I was feeling very defeated, very lost. And so one of the problems with that is at the same time, I was very high achieving. I loved school. It was always my safe place. I loved my teachers. I got straight A's. I was the class president for 4 years in high school. I was homecoming queen.
While dealing with all of these.
Yeah. While dealing with all of that, which it was wonderful. It was great. I loved all of that. But the problem was, because I had this image of this high achieving class president, homecoming queen, I wasn't really given the platform to talk about my emotional struggles and my history and the things that were still weighing on me and still harming me and hurting me years after. And so then that, you know, they say it's easier to advocate for others than it is for yourself, than for yourself. And so one of my friends in high school confided in me that she was harming herself, also because of mental illness. And with this organization that I co-founded as a high school student, who kind of addressed any social issue we saw and then plan an event or a fundraiser for it, we decided our senior year to focus on mental health, because we were realizing how prevalent mental illness was in our age group. As we did more research, we realized that 50% of all lifetime cases of mental illness begin at age 14.
Absolutely.
We realized the connection between untreated mental illness and incarcerated youth. 3 in 4 incarcerated youth have a severe mental illness. Also homelessness, substance use. I mean, every issue that you can think of.
The epidemic of our time, and it stems up mostly a lot from mental illness.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's untreated mental illness. That's the big problem. And it's actually...
That's a good way to word it.
It's the lack of treatment that causes the problem. So if we think about 70% of youth go untreated, that's a horrible, very large number. And if we're trying to reduce that, all of those other issues, the homelessness, the substance use, the other behavioral concerns will solve themselves.
That's right.
And so through my own experiences, also through seeing friends suffering and hurting, talking with my amazing group of friends who formed that organization that now is called LEAD, that was then called LEAD, Let's Empower, Advocate, and Do, we decided to address that through education, because every student is required to take a health class. So why aren't we taught mental health? Why aren't we taught about coping strategies? Why aren't we taught to seek treatment? Why isn't that issue destigmatized in our very schools? And so we spent our entire senior year rewriting the health education curriculum at our high school. It's 900 pages, big binder. We call it the baby.
And you and your friends actually rewrote the curriculum?
Yes.
Developed this curriculum?
Yeah. So we did it through a lot of research. Right. So first we went back and we found out that the Massachusetts health standards have not been updated for 20 years. And now that's in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts is usually very forward-thinking and very on top of its game. But clearly it wasn't as far as health standards.
Right. Yes.
Which means that for the rest of the country, it's so much worse. And so we took the existing health standards and then we added to them. So we're still meeting the existing health standards, but then combining it with mental health education. So for example, we always give this example. Instead of just nutrition and fitness, we talk about nutrition and fitness, and then also eating disorders, and also how what you eat affects your mood, and those very practical protective factors that can help you. So that's what we did.
That's pretty amazing, because
Thank you.
You're really on the cutting edge, because just now this whole social emotional learning framework is starting to be put into the schools, and it's because people are, you're way out in front on this issue, because it's just, I guess my big concern and passion as an educator is that I just believe we really have to be very proactive in identifying making sure people get the treatment, find the untreated, and that's been, from an early age, there are so many things we can look for. Particularly, I think people underestimate the impact that divorce does have on and when a family is disrupted, and there are a lot of things that signal there could be trauma that we really have to deal with. So that's pretty powerful. But what going along with what you're doing is that, and you would know this from the research you've done, is that one of the things we need to do as educators is help people find the things they're passionate about and find something that gives them meaning and purpose, where they can do something outside of themselves and give back and do, and that makes them feel good and elevates all those positive emotions. So you're living the fundamentals of well-being by really going beyond yourself and doing for others and really finding a cause and trying to change the world and make a difference.
Thank you.
It's pretty powerful.
Thank you. Yeah. And I mean, even though for me personally my trauma wasn't the divorce of my parents, I think the thing about trauma is it can be anything. It's all in perspective and experience, and that is one of the strongest predictors of developing a mental illness. So and also, just like you said, one of the biggest problems that we've discovered through talking to educators is that lack of being able to identify high-risk behavior in students, being able to identify signs and symptoms of mental illness, and those things we need to be at the forefront of, because teachers are our front lines of defense.
That's it.
Right? We need to educate them to then help and save our students.
It's interesting because so often depression gets masked as indifference, and in the old days back when a child would sit there and be passive, he doesn't care, she's lazy, and identifying that every kid wants to be a good kid. Every kid wants to achieve and do well, and to really sort of look past the passive face and see what's behind and what's in that soul, So it's really powerful work, and I think that we've done put so much emphasis on test scores and grades that we're forgetting sort of that inner core, and really looking at the emotional health, particularly regulating emotions and handling emotions. It's
and they go hand in hand, because if you're focusing on, improving the emotional, mental, holistic health of a student, it's going to increase and improve test scores.
Well, absolutely.
It's hand in hand.
It's absurd to think, that a child sitting there who's thinking about, suicidal ideation or all of these things that are running through their minds, that they're going to be able to take notes on Shakespeare or if we don't, like you say, if we don't address both really aggressively. But I was going to ask, because the research now we're reading about college campuses and maybe shifting there, because we're finding, number one, that a lot of the kids we send to college don't make it through, that they drop out for various reasons. But just the recent study came out, the number of kids on college campuses who are suffering from severe anxiety. Do you see that, and what thoughts do you have on that?
Yeah. So one of the many programs that my organization actually provides is Youth Mental Health First Aid Certification, which is a program that teaches any caregivers of students, educators, or community members, students, how to respond to a crisis or non-crisis situation involving mental illness. And so I teach that on campus. I'm the youngest instructor in the country for this program.
So you actually teach it?
Yeah, I'm the instructor for it. We've now certified over 120 students on GW's campus, and we're looking to expand to Northeastern's campus this fall. So we're really excited about that. But to answer your question, through that, I learn a lot. And I talk to students all the time, and I hear about their personal experiences. And you don't go to a class like that unless you've been touched, unless you've been impacted, or that's your life's work, you need it professionally, whatever it is. And yes, anxiety is a problem, but I think what's more of a problem is the issues that are happening on campus. Sexual assault.
Yeah, I was going to ask
incredibly
you about that
common.
Too.
And people are dealing with that all the time, not only in responding to it, wanting to know how to respond to a friend who has been assaulted, but also being assaulted yourself. Understanding how to respond to that is really important, and I see that playing out all the time on college campuses. I also see just anxiety, lack of stress management. We're not even taught the basic stress management tools in high school or elementary school or before that. And just basic stress management is missing. And so we have, professors giving you loads and loads and loads of homework and weeks of assignments without telling you this is how you should study.
Right,
this is the best way to prioritize your time. This is a great way to juggle all of the activities and the courses and the clubs that you're in, because every college student is so busy.
I am with you. So but we need to be doing that way before college. That's been one of my passions. Is this whole idea is, it isn't enough to say go home and study. It's that you have to be taught, and particularly how to manage time, because you're right. That's one of the top reasons kids end up leaving school. They can't manage it all.
Right.
And we're assuming that by the time they're 18, 19, that they've learned all this, and we're throwing them into these situations. It's not good. But go back to the sexual assault one, because are you seeing a change in attitude? Because
sexual assault can often lead to post-traumatic stress or severe anxieties, and not to keep throwing statistics at you, I find them really powerful. And half of all students with a severe mental illness that goes untreated drop out of school. And so a lot of the people that I talk to in my certification classes tell me, I have friends, multiple friends, that have left school, left their college education because they cannot handle the anxiety or the depression or their eating disorder or any of those very serious issues. And that breaks my heart, because education is one of the most powerful tools we have in this world, and we need to be supporting that. Sexual assault is a problem. I think, though, it's the response to sexual assaults. I think same with response to mental illness. We're not taught how to respond. We're not taught how to support. That's just
But I guess I'm curious about just reading one of the book that Krakauer wrote about Missoula and the rapes at Missoula at that time in the 90s, and I just was reading it, and how there were a lot of the male athletes had sort of they had a great reputation on campus, and they were they tended to be, a lot of the assaults were happening at fraternity parties and sporting events and things like that, and they were covered up, and schools weren't dealing seriously with it. I'm just wondering, has that changed? Is there a much more serious when sexual assault does
it hasn't changed. Look on the TV. Brock Turner, his name's Brock Turner.
Yeah.
He went to jail for how many months? And that was it. And it's also a race issue. And I mean, white boys who get white men who get accused of sexual assault, they get in and out of jail quicker than you can even watch TV. But if you take any other marginalized race, black men, Hispanic men, any other men, they have much longer sentences. They have much more severe consequences. They're kicked out of school. Brock Turner is returning to school.
Yeah.
That's a race thing too.
Going back and continuing on issues on college campus. One of the issues surfacing across the country is the whole issue around transgender. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because in addition to all the other things going on, this is rising to the surface. Can you speak a little bit about that?
What I can tell you is, I think one of the biggest issues around this topic is people confuse gender and sexuality, and they're very different. People try to jumble the two, and they're different.
That's why this is so important, because I think, and you're not passing yourself off as an expert.
The main thing is gender and sexuality are different, and people confuse the two.
That's why it's important to clarify. That's my point, is just that, the more information we get to educate.
And then the second thing is, the majority of students and the majority of people in this country right now view gender on a spectrum. They view gender as fluid, and sexuality as fluid. And so if you're thinking about it in that way, you're not trying to box somebody in, label them. For some people, having a label or a name to identify themselves with is really empowering and helpful. For other people, it's really not. And the whole point of that is you have to ask, what is helpful to you? How do you identify? How can I be a support to you? It's not about you or what you think is right for their life. It's about what makes them comfortable, what they're happy with, and what they want. And then you need to respect that and love them enough to do that. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Do you find that there's, it seems to me with the younger generation coming along, that there's much more tolerance and acceptance around issues that when I was growing up would never even be discussed or understood? Do you find that there's more tolerance among young people for differences, and or are you still seeing some of the old prejudices, or are you seeing this younger group more tolerant?
I think there's a lot more tolerance now, which is an amazing thing. I think we still have a lot of work to do, but I think there's a lot more tolerance. I also come back to race as being a big issue. I think, for example, with the transgender community, transgender individuals who are African American face health disparities and other issues, like societal issues, much harder than their white counterparts.
So much comes down to race.
So much comes down to race. So yes, we've come a very long way, and I'm so proud of that. And I love being a part of a generation that's finally giving people that voice and giving people that platform to be who they are completely, unapologetically. But we do have still some work to do.
That's, and I just had a final question, and you've sort of answered it all along because it's become kind of your life's work now. But when you look back to school, when you were growing up and in elementary school and middle school, what would have helped you more from the schools? What would have been a way schools could have supported you more? Can you think back and see, because I think that your experience will help shed light on what needs to be done in schools. We're working on it, it's coming along, but when you look at young people and the people you know who maybe were going through some things outside of school.
I think it comes back to educators being trained to respond to anything. And I think growing up, I faced a lot of big eyes. I faced a lot of, oh my gosh, like you just said that to me. And almost like teachers wanted to be relieved of that issue. They wanted to just send you immediately to a guidance counselor or send you away or say, oh yeah, that's the problem child, or that child has this issue, instead of actually being there for you and supporting you and responding to you, or giving you a warm handoff, we call it, to a professional or a clinician versus just throwing you to the office.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. You have hit the nail, because I think we want to do like a separate curriculum outside of the classroom teacher that the child has the bond with. Right. And if that teacher had the skills and didn't get nervous about it and understood, we teach them.
And they do care.
They care.
They care so much, but they don't know how.
This is it. That's going to be my goal.
Okay.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much. This was it was such a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you so much.
I just admire you for what you're doing, and keep up the good work.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today on It Takes a Village: Raising Resilient Kids in Today's World. I'm Ann Bergen.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.